We are officially 88 days away from kickoff, and we are here to help you get through these dark summer days. This is the Volatile Podcast, your weekly reminder that being a Vols fan is a terminal diagnosis that we all share. I'm Mac Williams, and I'm joined by my good friend Nick Duncan. Nick, how are you doing tonight, man?
I am doing well. I say I'm doing well. I'm doing well generally. Every time I think about the Vols, I get really sad. So,
Yeah.
so it's kind of normal. It's just normal life right now.
Everything outside of this podcast is good in your life.
Yeah,
But every time we reconvene here, we're reminded of how miserable and terminal our lives are. So.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I forget especially in the summer, now that there's not like active sports gnawing at me every minute, I'm kind of like, I forget for a few days. And then we do the podcast and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a Tennessee fan. So
yeah, my wife will be like, why are you so happy? And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I was. I guess it's just Tennessee sports aren't on.
There's no Tennessee sports right now.
I wasn't trying to be happy, please.
Yeah.
Oh, me. Well, we'll kick it off tonight with some latest news. So football has had a pretty eventful week, especially for the offseason. Tennessee has landed 3 commits since our last recording. The 3 commitments that we got are Malik Howard, Christian Mays, and Dylan Haley. All 3 of these guys have committed. 2 of them are high school guys. One of them is a junior college transfer. Malik Howard is a 4-star tight end from Oak Ridge. He is pretty highly touted tight end. I mean, I don't know where he falls like nationally among tight ends, but I know that Tennessee beat out Oregon and Notre Dame were kind of 2 heavy hitters in his recruitment. So Tennessee beat those guys out. I was listening to VolQuest, and Matt Ray, I believe, was talking about how, this is basically Tennessee's primary tight end target. Like, this is the guy they wanted most. Okay. They're hoping to get another tight end to solidify the class, and they're looking at, this is, interesting for us in the mid-state here, but they're looking at Colton Johnson. And if that name doesn't ring a bell to you, he is the tight end / defensive end at Upperman High School.
Upperman Bees.
Yes. So Colton Johnson is on Tennessee's radar, and I think they're hoping to get him on campus to be Malik Howard's backup. I think is what his role is going to be. So hopefully they get him. It'd be really cool to see a guy from Upperman go to Tennessee.
Well, they will need both of them when they go into 12 personnel on the 1-yard line, and they're going to have to throw it to one of them out of that.
Exactly.
Who's going to have the better hands?
Yeah. Who's going to drop the ball on 4th and short against Oklahoma next year? We don't play them unless we have both of them. So
I mean, Faison Brandon's going to have to throw it over somebody's head for a pick 6, right. 99 yards the other way.
Yeah. Exactly. This isn't like crap on Colton Johnson time, but I'll take advantage of the moment while I can. I have a close friend who and many listeners are going to know, who coaches at Upperman. My buddy speaks very highly of Colton. Great kid. My buddy has never said anything negative about his physical abilities, his mental abilities, how he plays, his character, any of those things. Being an objective third party, I have watched Colton Johnson play, and I do not think that he's cut out for the SEC. I am kind of shocked that he's being recruited as heavily as he is by a few SEC schools. But it'd be a cool story nonetheless, and I hope
is it intangibles? I don't know much about this kid. I've heard his name as being someone that scouts are interested in, but is it just like, is he just a big kid? Is he quick? I mean,
he's massive. I mean, for what is Upperman now? Like, are they 4A now? I think
so. That sounds right.
For like a 4A football player, he kind of towers over everyone. Like when they played Siegel last year in the playoffs, I went to that game. Colton, that's the thing, man. Like, I'm sure his film's fine, but like when you watch him play, and maybe this is just a byproduct of what Upperman's offense has been over the last few years. I mean, Upperman's had, a really great quarterback who has recently committed to, and is on campus now probably at Appalachian State. So that's where Upperman's quarterback went. But his name is Bronson Chaffin. Anyways, Bronson, was. I mean, I'm not just saying this. I mean, you wouldn't watch him and be like, oh, that's Cam Newton, but he plays very similar to how Cam Newton played.
Sure.
So Bronsden, and I think that's who he kind of models his game after, and it shows. Bronsden is very quick to pull the ball and get downhill and run people over and do that kind of thing. So maybe, Colton just hasn't looked that great as a pass catcher because of their offense. But I say all that to say I haven't been super impressed with his film and with what I've seen him. But you can tell that the build, the intangibles are there because he is so much bigger than, like a school like Siegel, which we would think of as having a lot of, big SEC caliber type guys. And he looked like the biggest guy out there. So,
Okay. Yeah. So maybe it's something like that. Like, yeah, he's big. We can do something with him. Maybe he's a project kind of guy, like you said, like a backup probably for the first couple of years at least,
Yeah.
So
and since Jeff's not here, I'll bring up Ethan Davis since you're talking about a project. But
yeah.
Anyways,
I was literally about to say maybe he's the next Ethan Davis. Like
maybe he is.
Maybe he
Maybe
can.
he is.
Maybe he can be on the roster for about 4 years before he breaks out, like he's going to this year.
Amen. Yeah, if Jeff were here, he would say, "But hey, he's going to have a great year, guys." That's what he would say. So, that's for you, Jeff. But yeah, no, I actually do think that this is getting off topic, but I actually do think Ethan Davis is going to have a good year. I actually do think Ethan Davis is a good player, no matter what Jeff says. And so I'm excited to see what he does. Anyways, yeah, Malik Howard coming to Tennessee, 4-star from Oak Ridge. The next guy, Christian Mace, he is the junior college transfer. I think he went to, I'm going to say this and it's not going to be right, but he's definitely from Mississippi, a Mississippi school. And I feel like it's East Mississippi Community College, but I don't know that it is. Obviously, East Mississippi Community College is famous. That's in Scuba, Mississippi, I believe. And that's famous for what's that show called? It's the Netflix series. They covered that team.
Yeah, there's a show that covers.
What's that show?
I don't know. I've never watched it. I know of it.
I can't think of the name of it. It's a great show. You should watch it. Yeah. And Tennessee had a player from that school.
He's from
ago.
Northeast Mississippi Community College.
Northeast Mississippi. So I had the wrong north. I had East, but not north.
East. So. Yeah.
Anyway, well, so not East Mississippi.
I'm also reading that he picked Tennessee, since you were noting who Malik picked Tennessee over. He picked Tennessee. He had offers from Arkansas, Auburn, and Mississippi State. I went with Tennessee. So pretty good little pick list there as well.
Yeah, doesn't quite have the caliber of Oregon and Notre Dame, but
not as good as Oregon and Notre Dame. I will totally agree. But
that actually, so let me just say, a list like that raises concern for me. Maybe it shouldn't. But like what I'm hearing is the bottom tier SEC schools, and Auburn is fringe, but the bottom tier SEC schools really wanted this guy, and Tennessee is the biggest name undoubtedly on that list, and we got him. It's like, of course we would get him, but why did none of the other SEC schools want him?
Sure. I totally agree. Stars and maybe this is something to talk about, but stars obviously mean something. Like if I were to look up our recruiting class at any given point and there's like 15 3-stars on there and there's like less than 5 4 and 5 stars, that's concerning. But the more important thing is like who else wants you? Like if you're a 3-star, but you're getting offers from top tier schools, then it's like, okay, you're whoever's evaluating you at 247 or scouts or whoever else does this on 3, their evaluation's probably off, because obviously college football coaches are better at evaluating players than recruiting sites, I would think, typically. So
yeah, definitely. I do also wonder though, like, I don't know what the tipping point is, but at some point, like if Bama's giving you an offer, then like even if let's say Georgia hasn't really done a lot in your recruitment, but if Bama's offered you, then like it seems like Georgia is going to be like, well, Bama's offering them, then we're going to offer them. And if Georgia offers, it's like, well, LSU is going to offer. And if LSU offers, then it's like, well, Tennessee or whoever's next in that line, maybe Texas, Oklahoma, whatever, they're going to offer. So there's almost like this effect where it's like if you get the one upper echelon offer, a lot of times I feel like all the other offers kind of come with that.
Yep. That's true.
It's kind of like if there's like a group of girls and like 4 of them are really pretty and one of them is like not that pretty, the one girl that like isn't that pretty looks prettier because she's with the pretty girls, you know.
Of course.
So it's like they're like that effect too. It's like like sometimes I think that it can go the other way too. Is what I'm saying, where
Sure.
a player could not be that good, or maybe not as good as his offers say.
But they get an offer from Georgia, and everybody's like, "Oh gosh, what are we missing out on?"
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So I think
but
it's
then like maybe their evaluation was just off.
right. I guess what I'm saying is like I agree with you that like the teams on the list mean more to me than like the objective stars do. But I think also like it's not everything, right? It's like it can definitely help you inform. It can help make you think like, oh, this player's better. But I also think it raises that bar of your expectation when in reality, maybe Georgia had a very specific thing in mind for this player, but Tennessee's just like, oh, he's going to be a starter for us, and he's actually not good enough to be a SEC caliber starter.
Yeah. Which all goes back to like all of those are data points, and none of them can fully tell you obviously about a kid and how they're going to turn out. Which is why I think sometimes as Tennessee fans, where we're probably we've definitely not recruited consistently at that tier that probably like Georgia and Alabama, have recruited at for the last 10 or 15 years. And so it's always frustrating when it's like, why didn't this 5-star work out for us? Like we've talked about that on this podcast before. And it's like, okay, well, we got 2 5-stars in that class, and like Bama and Georgia each got 6, in their class. So the chances of them do all 6 of their 5-stars hit? I don't know. I would have to go back and study. But my guess is probably in every class, even of the 5-stars, there's probably like 1 or 2 that don't turn out to be what they were supposed to be.
Yeah,
and so,
absolutely.
When you're only getting a couple here and there, it's and you miss. It feels like we never get one that hits.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if Georgia has 1 out of their 5, that's like not nearly as good as they should have been. That's 20% of their 5-stars that aren't good. So it's like 80% hit. So that's a pretty good ratio. If Tennessee goes 1 for 2, even though it's the same number that failed as Georgia, that's 50% of that class 5-stars, and now that 50% carries a lot more weight. So I think you're right that they're able to stack talent in a way that we aren't, and so it just weighs heavier on us.
Right, and if that 80% number is right, like let's just theoretically say it is, and you're getting 1 or 2 of those guys a year, then it's going to feel like, okay, if we're hitting on 80% of those guys, but you miss on 1 or 2 over the course of like a 4 or 5 year span, it's just you're going to feel that a lot more because you're going to be like, oh, that whole class sucks. Like the best guy in that class didn't even work out. So that's why you just got to try to stack these guys up. So all the way back to your point, that list is not like super inspiring. I mean, I've seen worse. I've seen us take guys that have worse offer lists.
Yes,
but
yes,
yeah,
and like defensive line, you can never have enough bodies. So like the fact that this guy has some college experience. I heard, I think it was VolQuest again. They were talking about kind of his size, and I guess he's like over 300 pounds. Maybe I think I remember 350 is what they said. And so that's a big boy, for playing defensive line.
It's like what was that guy that we had? Elijah Simmons. That's what I was like.
I knew exactly where you were going with it. Yeah, exactly. And
his shoulders just went straight up to his head.
Incredible singer. If you know Elijah Simmons sing, go listen to Elijah Simmons sing. The dude is incredible. He's like Ruben Studdard on steroids.
Ruben Studdard. That's a deep cut right there.
That's a deep cut right there, yeah. Anyways, so yeah, that's Christian Mays, Northeast Mississippi Community College. So I wrapping him up. I think he's going to be on the field. I mean, you're probably going to see this guy, and if he is good at all, you're going to probably know his name pretty quickly. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know how different the defensive scheme will be, obviously, but typically we rotate a lot of guys, and if anyone can coach up anybody into a higher tier, it's Rodney Gardner. So you just
that's it. Yeah,
I mean, like put all the bodies you can in there that are 300 plus pounds, and let's see what he can do with them. So
exactly. Moving on to Dylan Haley. This is the guy I know the least about. I don't even know how many stars he is. So if you know that, definitely add it in.
3-star.
Perfect. 3-star. Dylan Haley. He is a cornerback from the state of Georgia. I don't know who Tennessee beat out for this guy in their recruitment either. But
I can tell you. Would you like to know?
Yeah, I would love to know, please.
I think it's a little bit better of a list. A little bit.
Okay.
Ole Miss, Florida, Auburn.
That's definitely a better list.
Okay.
You took away Arkansas, Mississippi State, and gave me Florida and Ole Miss.
Ole Miss.
So,
yeah. Florida's obviously down, but it's Florida.
It's Florida.
And Ole Miss just made a college football playoff. So Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good list. He's listed as an athlete, but athletes are always cornerbacks or wide receivers, right? Feels like
And it feels like at Tennessee they're more cornerbacks than wide receivers.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So yeah, he was a 3-star. Apparently, he on 247, he's the number 55 athlete and the number 84 player in Georgia, which seems low, but it's Georgia, so that's probably not incredibly, disrespectful. So
no, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think quarterback is another one of those positions, especially with as bad as Tennessee has been in the secondary in past years. I think that's another position where you're like, as many guys as we can get in here.
yeah,
And again, I don't want to just recruit guys because they're in a certain position from a certain state. Like, I hope that Tennessee's looking at him and saying, okay, he does these things really well. This
yeah,
helps our team in these ways. I hope that they have a vision for a role that he's playing. I think it's a balance of like, you need to get as many talent at the most talent that you can get and as many of those guys you can get in the room, but also like you have to have a plan because I do not trust Josh Heupel coach teams with good athletes that don't have any structure or don't have a plan because it seems like when we get those type of guys in that type of situation, we get the worst version of them. And
well,
so,
I'm a little concerned that he'll be in a cornerback room where people won't be taught to just not turn their head around like Willie Martinez has taught them to do for the last 10 years. So,
yeah,
I mean, is he going to turn his head around? I mean, who knows? So
we'll see. We will see. Yeah, I mean, it really is sad that like when you think about, I mean, when I think about like good Tennessee cornerbacks in recent years, it's like obviously Jermon McCoy was very good.
yep,
And then Ty Redmond last year had a great year.
Redmond was good.
So I think of those two guys. Before that,
Colton Hood obviously was good.
Colton Hood. So before last year, though,
Kamal Hadden.
yeah, Kamal Hadden was good. So that you,
He was good.
I forgot about him. The name I was going to say was, oh geez, now of course I'm blanking on it. Cam Sutton. That was so. It feels like there's a gap in talent. It's a gap in talent. Like Tennessee had Cam Sutton, and then they had who for however many years, and then Kamal Hadden kind of came on the scene.
Yeah.
And so
I agree. It was dark. Like, I mean, people have thrown all over us for years. It feels like so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you think like 2016 was Cam Sutton on the 2016 team, or had he already gone?
Good question. I think he was already gone.
So if he was already gone, you think about the 2016 season, which obviously at that time there was a little bit of magic with that season. But like the Georgia game, everyone remembers for the Hail Mary. But like the diehards, I know and a lot of our listeners probably know. But like the casuals kind of forget that like Tennessee basically gave that game away right before they had that Hail Mary. I mean, we got beat deep, and Georgia scored with like however many seconds left. And if it weren't for their kicking the ball out of bounds penalty, and then the obviously like Jawan Jennings is a stud, but like there's a little bit of like if you ran that Hail Mary play 10 times, how many times would you actually complete it? Probably the one, but Jawan Jennings is just that guy. So of course you completed it, but like 9 times out of 10, you're not making that play. So like I don't want to say you got lucky, but
Sure.
your athletes made athletic play and you scored that touchdown, which is great. But like you should have really lost that game, and we lost that game because our cornerbacks couldn't cover a receiver in an obvious like Hail Mary type situation for Georgia.
He's obviously throwing deep here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to go back and correct myself, Cam Sutton was taken by the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 3rd round of the 2017 NFL draft.
So he was on that team, but he's definitely not. I think it was. I was going to say Malik Foreman, but I don't think that's right. I think it was number 8, whoever number 8 was, but I'm blanking on his name right now.
Rashad Golden.
Was it Rashawn Golden?
That was the first name that popped in my head when you said that. So
yeah, I think he might have been the one that got beat deep. And I mean, Rashawn Golden, I think if this is all just off the cuff memory stuff. I think Rashawn Golden is the guy who double birded the Alabama fans when we were losing like 40.
He 100% is that guy.
Okay, so Rashawn Golden, has a kind place in our heart for that. But if he is the person I'm remembering getting beat on that Georgia play, then that's like not a very good look for the young man.
Yeah.
So
he was drafted in the 3rd round of the 2018 NFL draft, so very well could have been.
Yeah. So
could have been.
That's Dylan Haley, 3-star commitment from Georgia. The last bit of football news here is that David Gabriel Georges had his visit this past week at Tennessee. And what I was going to tell you about this, Nick, is just that what everyone's saying is that Tennessee pulled out all the stops, which isn't surprising. I mean,
Sure.
this is their
He's like
prize.
the number one guy they want in the whole class,
Exactly.
right?
So it makes sense they did everything they could to get this guy. Alvin Kamara was on campus. They did all the photo shoot stuff that the kids enjoy. They had the rock painted for him, all the things. So Tennessee did everything they could within their power to secure that commitment from David Gabriel Georges. He still is planning on visiting Ohio State one more time, and I think there's another school he's going to visit as well. So the verdict's still out on him, but they were talking about on one of the podcasts that basically DGG is kind of the biggest recruit that you've had and been excited about since Nico, I guess. And I was going to ask you, because, obviously Tennessee did the same stuff, pulled out all the stops to get Nico. Are you try and remove what's happened with Nico that
Sure.
Sure. At the time that Nico was being recruited and we were maybe going to get him, maybe not. And the time that David Gabriel Georges is being recruited, we're maybe going to get him, maybe not, which is now. Which guy are you more excited about in those two theoretical time periods?
More excited about DGG or Nico as far as their recruitment, in the moment?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, probably Nico, man, just because he's a quarterback. Right. I mean, and it just feels like in modern football, it just feels like in modern football that you can get by with a decent running back, but it's hard to get by with a decent quarterback. We just don't live in a day and age where a running back typically can go win you a football game. So I am pumped about this, but not as pumped as I think I was about Nico, because who knows how much of this stuff's true. But when it was going on, it was Saban wanted Nico more than Arch because they were in the same class. Mm-hmm. And it was Nico was higher up Saban's board. Is that even true? I don't know. Was it just Tennessee fans saying that because we got him?
Yeah.
But he was just so highly ranked, and he was a quarterback, and we've just not had consistently good quarterback play for so long. So I was definitely more excited about that. But I'll be pretty pumped if we get DGG. Richard G. West posted a meme.
Uh-oh.
It's the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
There was a black star in Chattanooga and a black star. The state of Tennessee was orange. Uh-huh. Black star in Chattanooga, black star in Knoxville, with an arrow from Chattanooga to Knoxville.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. RGW News, he's wrong until he's right, boys and girls. If you say things, eventually you'll be right on something. So,
correct.
Richard G. West, good friend of the program. We love his work. So, yeah, no, I mean, RGW, man, I mean, he's a genius, first of all. He's the only person that's ever duped actual college football personalities. He's had ESPN write articles about stuff as if they were true, and he was just completely making them up. So
he's a legend. He's a legend.
I'll never forget. I was going to the Tennessee-Virginia game. This would have been 2022. Yes, 2022. It was the game at Nissan Stadium. It was the first game of the year, and me and my dad were going to this game. So it's Friday night, and obviously this first game of the year, I'm super pumped. We're going to the game the next day. My dad sends me an article. This is the night before the game. My dad sends me an article about how the game is being moved to Knoxville 24 hours in advance because apparently there's a serious crack in the foundation of Nissan Stadium, and it's not safe for the fans to be there for the game. And as soon as I read the article, I'm like, there's no way this is true. And I click on who the article is citing as their source, and it's Richard G. West. And I was like, Dad, this is not true. RGW is totally clowning you. He got this news article. Don't let him get you too. We're going to Nashville tomorrow. We're not going to Knoxville. So it was really funny. But that's just a classic RGW story. It's this dude can get people to believe anything. It is quite funny.
Oh, that's funny, dude. My dad has also sent me articles with the most ridiculous information in them, and I've read it, and 2 sentences in, I'm like, this can't be true.
Right.
Someone take Chief's phone away. He's just spreading fake news.
Oh
Love
my
you,
goodness.
Chief. Love you, Chief.
Uh, so in terms of the Nico thing, though, I agree. I think I was more excited for Nico's recruitment than I am DGG's recruitment. However, I will say that even then, this is not like a special revelation for me. Everyone was talking about this. I just think
Mhm.
that we didn't give it as much credibility as what we obviously now would. Even back then, there was a question about how good Nico would be, not because of his talent, but because he hasn't played that
He
much
didn't play
football.
a lot of football. Yeah.
Right. He only played 2 years of football. And
Yep.
so there was something that was kind of dampening his recruitment the entire time. And then obviously now with the way things have played out, and verdict's still I think technically out on Nico. If he has a great year at UCLA, he's probably going to be a first round draft pick if he has a great year. And so his whole career is still ahead of him depending on what he does. But I would not be shocked if Nico doesn't have a great year, drops in the draft, gets drafted in a later round, and never has a great NFL career. And I think
I
that's
mean, at this point, isn't that the more likely thing
probably. I mean, it's hard
based
for
on the history? It
yeah,
doesn't mean it definitely will happen. I mean, it's probably like 70-30, I would say. Probably like
yeah,
a 70% chance it goes that way, 30% that a new
mhm,
coach can come in with another new scheme
right.
and he'll
And,
take
and
off.
so I
So
bring that up and say that to say like I don't feel any sort of reservation at all about the talent
that's
that
true.
David George is bringing to the table.
That's a
I
good
think
point.
he is the best running back. I think he will be a great running back. I think he's going to be considered as highly like valued a guy looking back as like Alvin Kamara was, as like Jalen Hurd was. I mean, we were talking about a guy who could end up in like the Arian Foster kind of level of like looking back on Tennessee running backs.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I would like. I don't want to say Jamal Lewis. I don't want to say Travis Stevens or Travis Henry. Like, but
Sure.
like, it's very possible that he could be an
Arian Foster.
ultimate
What was
rusher.
the? I feel like he's so underrated, and I can't remember his name right now. But he was a running back the year that Kiffin was here. Who am I thinking of? Used to
Um,
spin a lot. Montario Hardesty.
Ontario Hardesty. Yes, yes. No,
He's probably in that category too, like Montario Hardesty, Arian Foster.
yep,
Yeah,
yep. So I really feel like David Gabriel Georges is going to be an all-time great Vol if you get him here. In the same sense, like I think he's going to be an all-time great Buckeye or like
yeah,
wherever he
whatever.
ends up. Like he's going to be phenomenal. And so I say that to say there is a part of me that's like I feel more secure in
Sure.
his recruitment at this time than I did in Nico's recruitment at that time. I probably was more excited for Nico because of really just because he was a quarterback. That's the bottom line. But like I do think that
Fair to say that that this recruitment, you feel like the floor is higher for what he can do,
absolutely,
and Nico, not for his position, maybe the ceiling's probably just as high for DGG at his position, but
absolutely,
the ceiling becomes higher for your team if Nico hits.
exactly,
So,
exactly. That's a
but
great way to put it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the whole situation. Obviously, I hope we get him. And really, I think gun to my head, like I think we will get him. I think Tennessee is going to secure that commitment. Um, we'll see what happens, but I feel pretty
yeah.
confident that Tennessee's going to land him. So, and this will be what the biggest running back recruit since,
Jalen Hurd.
or I mean, is he bigger than Jalen Hurd? Is it since Bryce Brown?
Probably.
Probably so. I think so.
Probably.
I think he's a bigger recruit than Jalen Hurd was.
I mean, if you'd got Alvin Kamara out of high school, it would have felt that way,
right.
because I think Alvin Kamara was kind of that level.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously was that good. And we just,
exactly.
Let him touch the ball 6 times a game. But
yeah.
let's not do that again.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, big get if we can get him. So let's hope that we do. Moving on to baseball. Since we last recorded, Tennessee has hired Austin Knight as the new pitching coach.
I think since we last recorded, has Tennessee fired their pitching coach and hired a new coach?
And hired. That's correct. That's correct.
I like it. I like it quick.
I do too. Let's start with the negative because that's easy. Here was my initial reaction. All I could think was we just hired the pitching coach who beat us and then turned around and lost in a super regional. This to me feels kind of like what Rick Barnes is doing in basketball in the sense of like, oh, hey, this worked, so let's try and do this, even though you may be a year behind on doing that thing, and this thing
Mm-hmm.
would be hiring ECU's pitching coach. Everyone's raving about him. Everyone says he's amazing. Everyone says he's the next great guy. He's pretty young. He's like 34 years old. Um, but so I'm sure, like, he could be great. This could be awesome. But my initial reaction was a little bit like, this just feels like we're trying to get the guy who beat us. And he might not
Yeah,
be good, but just
yeah,
because he beat us, we're valuing him way higher than he actually is.
yeah. I agree. It does feel like if he'd had the pedigree that he has on paper and came from pretty much anywhere else, I think I'd be more excited. But it does just feel like, I mean, it feels exactly like what you just said. No need to restate it, but I feel the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But his pitching staffs have
mm,
been in the top 25 and often in the top 15 in the country in
mm,
most statistical categories. So on paper, it's a good hire, and hopefully it translates into much better pitching than what we saw this year. So
yeah, no, and that's the bottom line. I mean, if he can even get you just one bullpen arm better, or one
or
consistent,
your starter's more consistent, right?
right,
Like
then it's worth it. I don't think Tennessee is losing anything by making this change. Probably was even needed, depending on the morale of the team and the pitching staff specifically. But I will be interested to see how his style meshes with Josh Elander.
yeah.
Now, one thing
Were
that
you?
was sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, were you? So my initial reaction, just even when we fired the pitching coach, was just like, I don't know. Were you shocked that 1 year in, assistants are getting fired? Because it just seems to me like couldn't shouldn't you have known that this guy wouldn't have been good enough when you hired him? I don't know. It just felt it's like really quick, and maybe not, but that was even more than just hiring ECU's coach. My first gut instinct was like, golly, we're already firing and hiring new assistants like after 1 year. That was just kind of a black pill for me. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I do wonder if it's just like I with the decision. So Ben McKee said that basically this pitching coach is who the past pitching coach, I can't even remember his name, but that's who Tony Vitello had picked to sort of replace Frank Anderson. It's not who Josh Elander had picked. And so I do wonder if Josh basically retained, for lack of a better word, the pitching coach, inherited the pitching coach that Tony Vitello had chosen. And that was just a, situational thing, a path of least resistance thing for Elander. And then
Sure.
it's the guy he would have chosen.
And it was pretty
So,
late in the cycle and everything too.
right. So
So
I guess I say that to say I'm willing to not give a pass, but I'm willing to assume the best about Elander in that situation and say, well, either
he
that's
recognized there was a problem and he fixed it.
right. And there's part of that, it could be just like job security. Like the pitching wasn't good enough. And so just like we kind of praised Heupel for like, okay, we're going to fire Tim Banks and go get a guy. Elander tried to do the same thing, and
Yeah.
he's trying to make the changes before things get too bad and he loses his job. So, I think that's good. But obviously, like if we get there, if we get to where we are now next year, and you lose in a regional again, or you lose in a super, and you're firing your pitching coach, and we're doing this all over again, that's when I'm going to start to be like, there seems to be a pattern here, and it seems like Elander can identify the right guy to coach his team from the
Sure.
pitching perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about Austin Knight too is that he apparently in college he was a catcher. He never was a pitcher, and I just thought that was an interesting factoid, just because obviously I think that and I get Frank Anderson. Frank Anderson was a middle infielder, so like he never was a pitcher either.
Right.
So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I just found it interesting that like yeah, we're hiring another guy who's not really pitched before. Obviously, a catcher is like
A catcher makes more sense because
right,
they're like the quarterback of like
right,
you would think a catcher should be able to almost coach about anything because
exactly,
they're moving everybody around, they're
exactly,
shifting people, they're if they're really good, they're calling pitches and they're able to identify, they should be able to work with pitch. They're working with pitchers to know like what their best stuff is, what they should throw in
exactly,
certain counts, things
exactly.
like that.
And another thing to consider in college, just for people who may not know as much about the sport of baseball specifically, is like when you get to college and you're coaching at the college level, obviously there is some coaching that you're doing about like mechanics or about pitches or things like that. But majority of your coaching capacity is spent on like situational stuff, like learning your players, learning how to get the most out of your players. It's not actually really coaching them how to perform. They already know that when they get to you. Like these guys already know how to pitch. They already know what pitches they have. There's not a ton of guys who are adding new pitches or taking away pitches. And if they are, it's pretty obvious. Like, hey, we need to stop throwing this slider because you're not getting enough break on it. People are smashing it. Like, let's get rid of this pitch.
Yeah.
So like
it's tweaking things and perfecting things.
Right. So I don't think that you have to be like a pitching expert to necessarily be a pitching coach in college. It's more about like knowing what pitches to call, knowing how to talk to your guys, knowing how to get the best out of them, knowing when to make pitching changes. That's the stuff that's like more important. And actually teaching them how to pitch and throw their pitches is like not really that big of a deal in college. That's more high school stuff. So I'm not really worried about that. I just thought it was interesting.
Yep.
So last bit of baseball news here. Brandon Kersey is a commit that Tennessee secured from Mercer. He's another two-way player. So, Tennessee seems to really be
Blaine Brown 2.0.
Yep. And then the guy who transferred, Taylor Tracy. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Taylor Tracy. He was a two-way guy. So, Tennessee, it seems like they're kind of targeting some of these two-way guys and just seeing kind of what they do. As a strategy generally, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. This guy has a lot more pitching pedigree than Blaine Brown did coming out of Rice. He actually had some significant innings at Mercer, has pitched in some high leverage moments. So I'm more excited about this guy. Not more excited than Blaine Brown, but more excited about this guy just generally because
he seems more like a true two-way player.
Exactly. And so I hope that he's good enough that you have to have him in the lineup as a hitter. And I also hope he's good enough that you can put him in some middle relief innings or late closing situation innings and him actually be a significant, person in this rotation. But we'll see. Obviously, I don't think you can have too many guys that can throw and hit. I think that's a good problem to have. A guy that gets overlooked a lot as a two-way player is Drew Gilbert. Drew Gilbert was recruited to Tennessee primarily as a pitcher, and just turned out that he was MLB caliber hitter, and people just didn't know it yet.
He's got to be on the field, and he's fast.
Exactly.
Stick him in center.
And like what's crazy is he's really kind of an elite defender too. Yeah. I mean, Drew Gilbert. All things considered, Drew Gilbert might be one of the best players Tennessee has ever had play at the university. Obviously, that list is filled with crazy good guys. Chris Burke, Todd Helton. I mean, even in recent years, like Christian Moore is obviously way up that list.
Jordan Beck is
Drew Gilbert might be the most complete player that Tennessee's ever had come through. And that's obviously saying something.
A five-tool player, if you will.
Exactly.
I watched Moneyball last night, so
it's fresh on the brain.
Fresh on the brain.
Great movie. But yeah, so I'm excited about this guy. I hope he's good. We'll see. I mean, we'll see if Mercer transfer a SoCon guy can translate to the SEC. I think that precedent obviously is there. You see a lot of guys coming out of those mid-major conferences that are really good in basketball and baseball. It's not uncommon.
Right.
So I just hope that it translates and that he plays well. Manny Marin has entered the transfer portal, which was kind of a shock a little bit, especially after we praised him last week. And I guess what it sounds like people are saying is that Manny Marin wanted to go into the draft. The people around Manny Marin basically helped him come to the conclusion that another year of college would be better for you than going into the draft. And he decided that his last year of college baseball would not be at Tennessee, is the fact of the matter.
Yeah, it's a bummer, man. I mean, is he the last guy left from the national championship team?
Was he on the national championship team?
Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I don't think he was. I think your last two guys. Well, and Stone. I think Stone was on that team.
Stone. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not. I could be wrong. I know for sure that Ariel Antigua and Reese Chapman were on that team.
I
Obviously,
think
Reese
I think
Chapman
I'm
was gone.
confusing Manny Marin with Reese Chapman. Yep.
Okay. Reese Chapman is now gone because he's too old. And then Ariel Antigua is transferring. So those two guys were definitely on the team. I'm pretty
Yep.
sure Stone Lawless was a freshman on the Dash Championship team, redshirt freshman.
I think that's right because I think that I was excited that there was someone who was supposed to be a true catcher on the team because that was like the one thing, even the national championship team, like that. If you can say one bad thing about the Vitello years is that we just never really had a lot of good catching play.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, it was okay. It wasn't like
Yeah,
horrible.
it's hard because Cal Stark actually ended up being a pretty good player at Tennessee,
Yeah.
and I think the role that he played was more of your traditional catcher in the sense that, like, I do think Cal Stark is kind of an unsung hero on the
Mm-hmm.
national championship team. He seemed to really have a lot of leadership and a lot of pull in the locker room.
He was
That
very consistent too. Like he
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
steady Eddie kind of guy. Yep.
He left a lot to be desired at the plate, but Cal Stark behind the dish was a really good player. Great arm, he was really aggressive when it came to like back picking guys and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but
He,
generally,
he,
I agree. I mean, the fact that you went into a season and Evan Russell was like, okay, Evan Russell's going to be our catcher, and he had never played catcher before. It's
right,
like it's just crazy.
right. It was crazy. And Cal Stark he did leave something desired at the plate. I think a lot of that was the fact that he was overshadowed by like that lineup was just insane.
Yeah,
Because
that's
like
true.
he had some big hits even in the College World Series, like
Yeah,
the year
that's
that
true.
the year that they won it. So uh,
That's true.
he ended as a much better hitter than when he came in, which it generally be true. But
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Manny Marin's gone. Cash Williams also entered the transfer portal, and he has committed to West Virginia. So Cash Williams is officially gone. Pour one out for my family.
bummer.
Yeah, so we're sad about that in our house. But I wish him nothing but the best. Obviously, West Virginia, good program, on the up and up, cool school. So happy for him. Hope he has a great career. Hope he loses to Tennessee in a regional or super regional. So,
Please.
yeah. And then the last is Levi Clark is officially coming back. So you've secured him. Obviously, great news. I think Levi Clark had a respectable year, is how I would describe it, but not necessarily an improvement from last year.
Yeah.
So you
Fair
just
to
hope
say it was a sophomore slump. I think,
yeah, I think that's fair to say. So you just hope he kind of resurges and
but
has a great year.
got better as the year went on, and seemed to be
Mm-hmm.
hitting his stride at the right time towards the end.
Right,
So
right. So we'll see, but I'm obviously glad to have a guy like that back. You'd rather have him here than somewhere else. So
absolutely.
glad to have him here. And that's pretty much it for Tennessee baseball news. Any other latest news you want to cover, Nick, before we move on to College World Series?
No, I think you got it. I'm feeling good.
So last week we talked about teams we wanted to see win. You said Mississippi State for family ties and also just general respect for the program. Joe said Auburn because he secretly has a crush on Auburn.
He
Um,
does.
and both of those teams were eliminated. So Auburn nor Mississippi State is in the College World Series. My question, Nick, is who are you cheering for? I know you probably know the teams, but for our listeners, I'll run through them. On one side of the bracket, you have North Carolina, West Virginia, Troy, and Ole Miss. On the other side of the bracket, you have four SEC teams: Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma. So, Nick, who do you want to see win out of those 8 teams? I think I already know your answer.
Yeah, I think at this point I'm probably West Virginia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I figured
Um,
that's what you'd say.
West Virginia, I mean, there's various tiers here, right? Like who I would most want to see win, probably West Virginia. Troy's a good story. Wouldn't hate that. Um, I don't despise Ole Miss or North Carolina. Basically, whoever comes out of that bracket, I'm probably pulling for over whoever comes out of the other side of the bracket.
Yeah, yeah,
So most don't want Georgia to win, and then Texas and Bama right behind them. Oklahoma wouldn't kill me. They're like the only team in that bracket that I wouldn't, be super black pilled about. But I don't want Georgia, Texas, or Bama for sure to win. So
So, if you had to pick somebody from that bracket, you're picking Oklahoma that you would
yeah,
want to
I
win.
think so. I think so. And I know Oklahoma generally has a better baseball program than definitely like Bama. Like this is Bama's first trip to Omaha since like '99.
Right.
But it's just Alabama. So I just,
Yeah.
if they cannot win, that'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I agree. I'm probably cheering for one of the teams from the weaker bracket. Um, Really, I don't care. I guess I wouldn't hate to see Texas win. Honestly, as just a kid who grew up liking college baseball more than the average person, I I liked Texas as a kid. Like, fine. I mean, Texas was
It
a
was hard to pull for Tennessee when you were a kid. So
right, right. Texas was just kind of a really trendy team to enjoy in the early 2000s, obviously, because they were great at baseball. You get the Vince Young National Championship. They just, Rick Barnes was, the Kevin Durant team. Like, Texas kind of had it going on back
yeah,
then.
for
So there's
sure.
a lot of guys my age that I know that like Texas. And
I
I
mean, I'm
don't
I'm a little bit older than you, but like that '04 national championship is still, I think, the best national
six.
championship. That sorry was Vince Young '06. So
2005 season, 2006 Rose Bowl.
thank you. So 2006, that Vince Young year, um, was is probably still the most memorable college football game that I've watched. That's not a Tennessee game.
Right.
And so that was true. And I did like Rick Barnes even when he was at Texas, like when I was in high
Mm-hmm.
school.
Mm-hmm.
And Tennessee, when I was a bit younger, Tennessee was had some good baseball years. When like Luke
Right.
Hochafer was there, they went to Omaha,
Mm-hmm.
and Delmonico was a good baseball coach, and so
Yep.
I can remember some of that. But you're right, Texas was just kind of always there, and they
Yep.
were and they were easy to pull for. So I totally get it. Yeah,
Yep.
but now they're in the SEC, so they can kick
Right.
rocks.
Yeah. So
But
yeah,
no, of I would rather Texas win than Georgia.
Georgia, Alabama. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I agree with that too. Um, I really do think, though, I think Will Heflin was the one that first made this point, but I agree with it wholeheartedly and would have said it myself had he not said it. But the fact, like, Georgia and Texas play each other in the first round in Omaha, on the Friday night game. Whoever wins that game and is set up in the winners bracket for the rest of that weekend, that's who's going to win the national championship, I think. And so
hard to argue with that. Hard to
whoever
argue
wins the
with
Georgia Texas game is going to, I think, end up winning that, and then they're gonna win the College World Series the next weekend. So I
that.
feel
So
like that's going to be one of those two teams. So you got to be
yeah,
pulling for Texas.
yep, yep,
Yeah,
that's fair.
honestly, this is you're gonna not like this take, and that's okay. But I would not be upset if it was like Ole Miss versus somebody from that. Obviously, it would have to be, but I would like to see Ole Miss win that bracket and have two SEC teams win the national championship again. I just think it's cool that SEC is dominating baseball, and I
Absolutely.
would not be upset if it would continue.
I wouldn't hate it. I most want West Virginia to win, but I wouldn't hate it if Ole Miss comes out of their win.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, North Carolina they were fun to watch in the Super Regional, like the way they won their Super Regional game.
right.
So I wouldn't hate that either. Like I don't know, you probably saw the end of that one, but for the listeners, like they're going to the bottom of the ninth and they got one out, got a guy on third, I think first and third with one out, they're down one, sack fly ties the game, runner on first and second, two outs, guy hits one to the wall in a gap on a walk off. Like it was just
Yeah,
to me that was probably the best moment so far
yeah.
in the tournament. So that was a good one.
Yeah, that or I mean, the Georgia Mississippi State series was so
Golly,
good.
man,
I mean,
everybody's just bombing away.
yeah,
I
that
felt
series was.
so bad for Mississippi State because,
I
like,
know, I know.
I
Well, it
mean,
sucks because I
that's
think
the black pill of Georgia too. It just feels like they could just hit anyone. Like it just feels like they're going to score 10 runs every night. Like
yeah, some would say it's like 2024 Tennessee, but
it's
that's
exactly
only
what it
some
feels
people.
like. Yeah, yeah,
Uh, it just stinks though because like you kind of walked away from that series feeling like Mississippi State's definitely one of the best eight teams, and it would be really fun to see them in the College World Series. And had they played, I mean, truly, had they played North Carolina, West Virginia, Troy, Oklahoma, or Bama, I would have picked them to win outright. I probably wouldn't have picked them to win outright against Ole Miss just because I think Ole Miss is big brother and they probably wouldn't have played as well. I
yeah.
probably wouldn't have picked them to beat Georgia because obviously they didn't. And then Texas is a really good team, so I would have probably struggled to pick them over Texas. But they would have beaten any other five teams for sure, I think.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
that's just the nature of the beast. Obviously, there's nothing you can really do about it. But it would be
It
nice in
happens. I mean,
theory.
the Tennessee had one of those years when they lost to Notre Dame in the supers. Like when you got to Omaha, you felt like they're better than most of the teams that were there. So
Yeah, it just happens. But I do. So let's make predictions here. Let's predict who's going to play, and then who's going to play for the national championship, and who's going to win. I'll go first. I'm going to go ahead and just take Ole Miss and Georgia. I think Ole Miss and Georgia will play. I think Georgia will win it all.
bro, I totally agree. That's what I think too.
You think those two teams as well?
Yep, I think Ole Miss is going to win that bracket. I don't even know that it'll be super difficult. And then I think I just don't know that anybody can beat Georgia. So
yeah. I'll say this: if Texas doesn't beat Georgia on Friday,
it feels like there's no one else that will beat them.
There's no one else that can beat them. Texas can beat them on Friday. They can, and if they do, then I still think Georgia has a good chance to beat Texas twice to get there. I don't think that Texas can beat Georgia twice to get there.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. Yep, I'm with you.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to questions on college football. It's a new segment. We're going to do one of these questions every week. This week's question is, what program has the most unrealistic expectations? This can be any answer you want. What program has the most unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, this is a tough one, man. Most unrealistic expectations. I saw this earlier this week, and I've had a hard time picking this one.
I'm between two teams.
Okay. I'm kind of between a couple as well.
How about I throw out one and then you throw out one, and then
we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first one that came to mind for me now. So the more I've thought about this, I think the second team I'm going to mention is actually my answer. But the first team that came to mind was Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The reason being is because, like, I think Texas A&M is like, they think of themselves as Texas, but they have the trophy case of Texas Tech. You know, they don't actually win anything, but they like to tote themselves around as if they are like the University of Texas. And obviously, like, in the last 20 years, Texas hasn't been that good either. But, like, Texas has the 2006 national championship, you know, and Texas obviously is a classic blue blood school. Texas A&M is not that. Like, Texas A&M has had some good programs, but, like, before Johnny Manziel, no one thought of Texas A&M at all. And Johnny Manziel really kind of brought them to the forefront of college football in terms of how people view them. And so I really think Texas A&M is expecting to be on the national stage. I think they're expecting to be in the SEC championship game, expecting to be playing for a national title in the next few years. I don't think either of those things are going to happen.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a really good one. But you got one more that you think is more unrealistic.
Yes.
Okay. I've got Ole Miss popping around in my head.
Okay. All right. Hit me with it.
Yeah. So I think it's something similar. I don't know. There's just a vibe about their fan base that makes me think that they, especially like when they were in the Old West, where they, especially probably during like the Hugh Freeze years, I think because they beat Bama a couple times, that it seemed like they felt like they were on the same level with the other teams in the West that were clearly just better than them, like Bama and LSU and Auburn for most of that stretch.
Yeah.
And they've had good players over the year and they've had some good runs, but they are the team that keeps rattling around in my head that their fan base seems to think that they belong in a tier that they don't belong in. So that's one.
That's a fair point. And I think this year specifically that's true because I think that Ole Miss thinks that they're going to be right back to where they were last year. I think they think they're going to be, a game away from the national title. They're going to be a team that makes a deep playoff run with Trinidad Chambliss.
And the media is not helping them any because it's Trinidad. It's all Trinidad Chambliss. Like he's because he's the best quarterback coming back. You know,
my shot here. I think Trinidad Chambliss got the bag now, and I think he's not going to be as good this year. I think they're going to take a step back. I think you're going to see more of them coming down back to earth of like, okay, Lane Kiffin's not here. People, the book is out on Trinidad. Like people are going to know what to do to defend him, especially in the SEC. I think Ole Miss is going to take a step back this year and not going to be as good.
Yeah.
So the next team I had in mind, and this is, I think, my final answer, is Nebraska. This is a little bit low-hanging fruit.
They've been rattling around too. Yeah.
But I think Nebraska, I mean, it's obvious. Like, Nebraska hasn't been good since the 90s in football. And to the credit of their fans, I feel a little bit of kindred spirit with Nebraska fans
100%.
because, they value their team as if they are a national title contender, and they struggle. They won 7 games last year.
Yep.
And so, I think Nebraska fans feel like they should be in the national media, in the national spotlight more. They should be valued more heavily as a blue blood type program. And I just don't think they are anymore. And I don't really know if they're ever going to be back. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I think college football would be better if they were back.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, it's hard to imagine them doing that at that point. There probably were people saying that about Tennessee, pre Josh Heupel. So, not probably. There definitely were people. I was probably thinking that about Tennessee.
I still think that a little bit. I'm starting to wonder if my children will ever see a national title at Tennessee.
Sure. But objectively, Tennessee's been a better program and been nationally relevant when Nebraska hasn't been. So
exactly.
So the other team floating around in my head that I think that of the 3 teams that are mentioned, I'll mention this team, and I think they're probably 4th on this list. But I think especially like the last 15 years, I'm throwing Penn State in there as well.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, dude, it's like not just their fan base, it's like national media and everyone. It's always like, who's it going to be? Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and now Oregon's thrown in the mix.
Washington.
And it's like, I'm sorry, like Joe Paul's not walking through that door, y'all.
No.
And it just feels. Again, I think their expectations are more realistic than the other 3 teams I mentioned because they've been there, they've done that, they have been nationally relevant in recent memory. But only because they've played a weak schedule and they have to play Ohio State and Michigan every year. Like, that's it. And so, Of course, they're 3rd in that list because those are only 2 really good teams they play every year.
Yeah. No, I think they do have unrealistic expectations. And maybe even, especially this year, the thing about Penn State this year is obviously they got Matt Campbell, but Penn State's schedule is stupid easy this year. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Michigan. They really, I don't know how good the team's going to be, but looking at their schedule, especially if you take Penn State teams of years past, this would be an undefeated Penn State team. This team is they should be undefeated. They're probably favored in every game they play.
It won't shock me if they win most or all of their games, get in the playoff and get absolutely smacked. And then this time next year, they'll just be insufferable. Yeah. And they'll probably be worse than they will be this year because they probably won't have that same schedule.
Yeah.
So, again, not the most unrealistic probably, but I think they're in the conversation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was good. I think all those teams were definitely worthy of being on an unrealistic expectations list. Let's go ahead and just, address the elephant in the room. Where does Tennessee fall on an unrealistic expectation list?
Yeah. I think if this was someone else's podcast, we're probably in the conversation.
I think so.
I think we're in the conversation. So, on that list, I think our expectations are. I don't think they're the most. I think Nebraska is low hanging fruit. I think those are the most unrealistic expectations. I think it's a really good pick, but we're probably in that next tier.
Yeah, I think so.
With those other teams. So
the hard thing thinking about it, coming into this season, is I think your average to above average Tennessee fans are realistic that this team is going to be a 7-win team at best, maybe 8-win team. So no one's picking us to make the playoff, Tennessee fans included. No one's picking us to win the SEC or compete against the better teams on our schedule, Texas, LSU, Texas A&M, fill in the blank. But because of that, I think Tennessee does kind of have their expectations calibrated a little more than they would. If we were getting, I think if George McIntyre had already solidified the job and it was hey, George McIntyre's our starting QB, he's looked like a stud, he had a great spring game, yada, yada, yada. I think if all that were true, I think expectations would be much higher than they are right now. But because there's been a little bit of question about that, because obviously you lost some weapons, and you lost good defensive linemen. You've got this change with the defensive coordinator. Because of all these things, I do think that Tennessee's expectations are more calibrated than they would be.
Yeah, I agree. I think if George had asserted himself, if regardless of who it was, I think if you had a clear like, okay, we've got a quarterback that we haven't seen yet, and he's supposed to be good, you'd feel like it would be easy to look at last year and be like, that was the transition year between Nico and whoever. But because it seems like Joey's a better option right now than the two quarterbacks that exist, I think you feel like, dang, like we're going to take a pretty big step back this year, and everyone's looking at 27 as the year to jump back.
That's another great point that I didn't mention, and you briefly mentioned, is that the expectations will be insane. Tennessee would probably be the top of this list if Joey was returning. If Joey was returning, there would be Tennessee fans, myself included, who would be picking Tennessee to go like 10-2 and be in the college football playoff. Yep. And I don't. That's probably not realistic.
It's kind of nice that that's not the case, because we're probably going to go 7-5 either way, or 8-4. So you'll be like, if we're all thinking like, man, I hope they can win 7 games. So if they were to win in some crazy way, if they were to win 8 or 9 games, we'll be like, oh son, we are set. Like next year, going into next year, we'll be insufferable. So
exactly. No, yeah. So that whole situation without Joey not having a clear QB, I think that's helped keep us more realistic. We didn't talk about this. I guess one more thing before we move on to our last segment, which I'm most excited for. So listener, if you made it this far, definitely keep listening, because we're about to get to the good stuff. But another thing that we haven't mentioned is the obvious news about Brendan Sorsby. I mean, we don't have to spend a ton of time here, but I think it's worth at least mentioning. Brendan Sorsby basically got a injunction that he's going to be suspended for 2 games, but he's going to be able to play after that. I guess generally, Nick, what are your thoughts about this in terms of how it affects college football as a whole?
Yeah, I think overall it's just more bad. I think it just shows that there's just no rules, and there's no one to enforce any rules. And, until there's some regulating body that can actually make rules and enforce them, we're going to get more of this. Like, if this isn't a catalyst for what I think is the only way forward, is like the Big Ten and the SEC can get on the same page and be like, this stuff has to stop. They're going to have to voluntarily choose to regulate and to do something. I don't know what that is. I don't know. Break away from the NCAA, do their own thing for college football. I don't know. But it just feels like, I mean, what can you not do now? And
right.
That begs the question, is like, what can you, like, how much can you do that you're not supposed to do and still be able to compete?
Right. Josh Pate did a brief little 11-minute episode talking about this, and one thing that he said, which made me laugh, which Josh Pate does often, is that he said, so like what happens now if a player like murders 3 people? Are they going to fight now? Like, I mean, like, at what point does what you do actually have consequences?
Yep.
And this just feels like a very obvious time where it's like, okay, you did something that was obviously very wrong, and not just like in terms of college football and the fact that but like throughout the history of sports, there's been a precedent set across all sports that like gambling, and especially gambling for or against your own team, is completely like not okay. Like Pete Rose was banned from the Hall of Fame until he died because of this, and so it's like, at what point, like, are we going to say, okay, what you do actually has consequences, and the consequences are you don't get to play anymore, you know? And they, like I said, I mean, they did it to Pete Rose effectively. His career was basically over when all this stuff happened.
I mean, we're very far from the Pete Rose days, from the SMU, from the Pony Express days.
Yeah.
I mean, from Arian Foster doing interviews and talking about Coach Fulmer bringing him tacos and how that's a violation. Like, that seems so silly now compared to what we're dealing with. Like, it's just insane how far it's come and what you can get away with. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, I mean, I guess a guy would have to murder somebody in cold blood on film
Right. Right. Yeah.
Like,
And I guess I
it's
don't
the
know.
only, it's the only, like, I've not heard that paint sketch, but that's literally what I've thought is like, okay, if someone murdered somebody in cold blood on film, would they be able to play next year if some
Right.
federal judge said they could play?
Right. Right.
And,
No.
and obviously, like, I'm frustrated that like Sorsby can play, but our very own judges in Knoxville won't approve Joey Aguilar to play the extra year that everyone else has gotten to play because of his situation. So like, it's frustrating, and it's just more of the same. Of, I mean, I can't channel probably all the energy of what Jeff would say, but like they're killing the sport in front of our eyes, which is what Jeff says. Jeff says that all the time, and this is more confirmation that he's right. Like they're running out of time to fix it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for Tennessee fans specifically, that's the hardest part is like you're seeing Brendan Sorsby get this injunction to be able to play. And like you said, Joey Aguilar couldn't get his. And that's just frustrating because like I think Tennessee would be a better team if Joey Aguilar was our quarterback this year. And I think that he, within the precedence that's been set, he has every right to play this year. And the fact that we couldn't get that from a Knox County judge is pretty ridiculous.
yeah, and now you're having Big 12 teams talking about possibly not playing Texas Tech because of this. And
Right.
like, it's going to take stuff like that. Like on it, like there's part of me that wishes that they just played a normal schedule and that they would run the table and win a national championship so that the whole nation would be so flaming ticked off that
Mm-hmm.
they'd be like, something has to be done because we just can't abide watching this happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm tempted to agree with you on that. The issue I take with that idea is that we saw this happen with Michigan.
Sure.
Like Michigan literally cheated. There's proof that they cheated. Everyone knows they cheated. And then it was all like, well, let them win the national championship because you know the NCAA is not going to let them have it. And they won the national championship, and they still have their national championship, and no one's there to take it away from them.
And there's guys like Reggie Bush that are probably watching this and they're like, what?
I know. I know.
What's
It's
happening?
crazy.
Like, that was not long ago that Reggie
No.
Bush like got his title, that got his Heisman stripped, and like and vacated wins because of illegal recruiting stuff. And there are just no rules anymore. There are none.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, there are rules. There's no one to enforce the set rules.
Unless Tennessee is violating the rules, then all of a sudden everyone decides that it's time to enforce them.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. One other on the subject before we move on to Rocky Top Roots. One other thing that Pate said, which I think is worth mentioning as well, is he was like, you have to. It's like if you're any university, you need to feel super dumb that you self-reported any violations over the last however many years,
Yep.
because you're stupid. Like if you confessed to doing something wrong to an entity that effectively has no power at all or is just refusing to exercise it in today's game, like you're an idiot and you deserve whatever punishment you got because the NCAA was never going to do anything to you if you would have just covered it up and moved on.
Yep. It did help us get rid of Jeremy Pruitt for cause.
It did. It did. It did. So that's one pro. All right, Rocky Top Roots, Nick, let's get into it.
Cornbread. Rocky Top Roots is going to be a summer segment this summer, at least this summer, where we go back and look at the history of Tennessee, the University of Tennessee's, particularly the athletics program. And so for this very first episode, I thought that we would focus on what is most identifiable about Tennessee sports. And I think if you asked most fans, especially fans that Tennessee fans will probably have various opinions on this, but if you ask the national, like if you polled the nation at large and just said like, what's the most identifiable symbol or tradition or whatever about the University of Tennessee, they'd probably say the power T. And so it just got me to thinking about our logos. It actually made me think about a lot of teams' logos and like how they've changed over the years and things like that. But it's made me think about, of course, the University of Tennessee. And so I just wanted to walk through briefly the history of logos at the University of Tennessee, kind of at a broad level. So going back all the way to 1909. So from 1909 to 1961, Tennessee's logo was, in fact, a simple T. The colors changed over the years, which we'll probably talk about that at a later time. It was more of probably more like a Texas orange, burnt orange in the beginning, and then changed to the beloved orange that we know today. In
Town 151C.
That's right. But it was a simple tee. It wasn't necessarily the power tee as we know it now. It was just a traditional tee, and that was a plain block script tee. Um, it was monochrome. That is the earliest standardized mark that the university had. Um, of note, that tee became a fully orange block tee, more like the tee we know now, when it was put on the helmets by Coach Doug Dickey in the mid '60s. So in the mid '60s, I think like 1964, Coach Dickey started having them the T on the helmet. Before that, there was just a stripe. It was just a white helmet with a stripe, and then we started adding a block orange T, and it became even more of an identifier of Tennessee football, particularly and of the university at large. Um, Not a lot changes in the '60s all the way up to the '80s. It's an orange stylized T above the word Tennessee on pretty much everything. It was a sans serif, pretty standard font with some diagonal cuts. And then we get to what I think is the most interesting period, and I hope will cause some conversation between you and I later on. But in the '80s, so starting in '83, and really going up until think of the Peyton Manning years, like early to mid '90s, you have a variety of logos, but the primary logo becomes the one that's on my hat, and there's a version of it on your shirt, which is the frontiersman, Davy Crockett, um, frontiersman here holding the rifle, the coonskin cap.
Mm-hmm.
And what my hat doesn't have on it is that official logo also had the word Vols underneath with the star in the O, which is also on
Mm-hmm.
your shirt. I don't know if you can highlight that in the middle of
Yeah.
your Davy Crockett, but it would be this particular frontiersman with the Vols that's on your shirt
Mm-hmm.
underneath the frontiersman. So you'd have Vols. And sometimes you can find pictures of this where it's like a Hunter Brown almost
Wow.
from the '80s. Like everything else would be orange, and you can find this logo in like a Hunter Brown. Um, but then also, of course, you can find it in orange, but it would say Vols, usually with the star. Sometimes it would just say Tennessee Vols underneath it. And also during this period, and you noted before we joined this episode, this was on the field for a long time at midfield. I also have this on this hat, but you get the UT interwrapped with each other for the University of Tennessee during this time period as well. And so the Power T actually kind of takes a back seat for about 15 years in lieu of these logos. Now, I found this really interesting because this has always been my favorite logo
Right.
for the University of Tennessee
The
and
rifleman.
the Rifleman, because I
Yes.
particularly love the idea of the Vols. So probably most of our listeners know this, but we are called the Vols because of the infamous um, the infamous sending of Tennessee volunteers to the Alamo, particularly to aid Texas in their fight against General Santa Anna and the Mexican Army when there's a dispute over Texas and the land there. And so we became known as the volunteer state, like the whole state. And then, of course, the University of Tennessee has always adopted that motto. We've had lots of mottos over the years. There was an early I actually learned this recently. There was an early nickname for Tennessee called the Hogs and Hominy State. If you go back before the Alamo, a lot of people called Tennessee the Hog and Hominy State because we kind of led the nation in like producing. This was obviously before westward expansion, but like producing corn and also pork. And so it's really
Nice.
funny because I don't think of those things for Tennessee like in this day and age, but called the Hog and Hominy State. But after the Alamo, after the Tennessee Volunteers, and Tennessee's always been known to send mass quantities of volunteer soldiers. So when we say volunteer soldiers, we mean non-conscripted, like citizens that are signing up to serve or join militias and go fight um, for freedom. Often when it doesn't even necessarily directly concern them, just going to help their neighbors. And so that is where the term volunteers comes from. And so I've always loved this because it represents Davy Crockett and the frontiersmen and what volunteers means, even more than just, of course, like the power T, which I do love, or the word Vols. Like I think it kind of fleshes that out. a little bit. And so, something interesting about these logos is that they were largely, most of our logos, these alternate logos, were created by a guy named Ted Williams, not to be
No
confused,
way.
not to be confused with the great legendary baseball player Ted Williams.
Both of which are in my family tree, by the way. But continue.
Oh, excellent. Robert Theodore Williams. He actually died just a couple years ago. He was 94 when he passed away. He
Wow.
was a graduate of Knox High School. He graduated from Knox High School in 1948. He graduated from the University of Tennessee in 1955, and he was a VFL. And he designed the Lady Vols logo. He designed the Rifleman logo, the university's official logo. If anyone's ever been around Knoxville or lived in East Tennessee or been around for any length of time, you'll know that like in Middle Tennessee, if you have an emergency and the helicopter has to come get you for medical reasons and take you off, you're life flighted. Well, I grew up in East Tennessee, and you would be life starred. So the emergency helicopters in East Tennessee are called Life Star, and there's an official University of Tennessee, like a very specific UT Life Star logo on all the helicopters, and Ted Williams designed that logo as well.
Wow.
And so he had a 34-year career as a graphic designer and public relations at UT. He served in the Marine Corps, 5th Regiment during the Korean War. This is actually, I'm not quoting now from his obituary. He cherished UT athletics and never missed a football or basketball game. Ted spent more than 2 decades coaching youth league sports. In his retirement, he spent time golfing, gardening, traveling, painting, and when he died, he was actually in the process of writing his first book. And so he worked for the university for a long time, lived his whole life in East Tennessee, was definitely VFL. And so I'm very thankful for Mr. Williams and for his work at the university, because he created my favorite logo particularly, and just seemed like a good guy, fought for our country, and served and also worked at the university for a really long time. And so his logos were the logos that were most prominent in the definitely throughout the 80s and then into the mid 90s. And then in 1997, the university made an intentional kind of PR decision to put these alternative logos in the vault, is the official language the university used. So they still retain the rights to them and things like that, but they don't put them on merchandise in the way that they did in the 80s and 90s. And so everything went to more like what the modern block power tee that we know today looks like. And then so that was in 1997. They do away with these, go back to the power tee. And then in 2015, they refined the power tee. They made it a little bit narrower, a little bit lighter orange block. And that is what is on the current campus and all of the primary athletic logos is the modern power tee that we know today. And it's the primary and probably will remain, I imagine, the primary logo. Of interest, though, there in the last since 2015, there's also been a secondary logo that's been put on a lot of merchandise, which never existed before, which is Smokey. So Smokey gets started, various versions of Smokey. Of course, the famous blue tick hound dog that is culturally prevalent. If you grew up in Appalachia, a lot of coon hunting. I went coon hunting one time and all night long and about killed myself. And there were some blue tick hounds there leading the way. And you're just crawling through hollers and through brambles and following these dogs and trying to obviously tree a coon and hunt it. And so Smokey becomes a prominent alternate logo that still exists, but it's not the primary logo. But these logos, the interlocking UT, the Vols with the star, you can still find those things. Obviously, Mac and I are wearing them right now. But they've all taken a back seat primarily to, of course, just the power tee and then also and the Smokey logo. And it makes sense to me. The power tee is the most recognizable thing. I think most fans, if they were polled, would say the coolest Tennessee tradition is running through the tee. And so that's who we are. So the power tee has been our core identity pretty much always, but definitely since 1964. It took a little bit of a backseat in the 80s and 90s. But for most of our life and our fanhood, most of my Tennessee hats, this is my favorite one, but pretty much every other hat has a power tee on it. And so that's kind of just a broad level history of our logo. And I guess, just from there, we can talk about whatever, but I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are about, do you like the fact that it primarily is just a power tee, or do you wish that there was more variety? I mean, I imagine, I didn't find any evidence of this, but I imagine that if you're a longtime fan and you had been maybe our age or probably even a little bit older, like if you were in your 50s and 60s and you'd been a Tennessee football fan, and then things like the rifleman and the interlocking UT, like if when different things start showing up, you may have been like, I don't know, I don't like that. Maybe in the same way that we've probably reacted to like smoky gray jerseys. Like,
Right.
I don't know if we, like that. Do we like the black jerseys better? Like these things are new. They've not existed in our tradition for a long time. So would you like to see, like, how would you feel if Tennessee came out with some kind of alternative logo that was totally new? It's not the Rifleman. It's not UT. It's not Smoky. I don't know what it would be, but like just some variation of something. I'm trying to think about what those fans felt like and how quickly it stuck around for a while. So I don't think anyone was, upset about it. I grew up in the 90s, and this logo was on pretty much everything when I was a kid. So yeah, I thought it was interesting to think that it's pretty much always been the T, but there were these alternate logos that were really prominent for about 15 or 20 years. So
yeah, I guess to answer your question, like I'm extremely fond of the power tee. I do agree that that's kind of like the symbol of being a Tennessee fan. I have no issue with it being at the forefront of our branding, if you will. But I do think that the riflemen, in particular, the riflemen, over any other alternate, even the interlocking UT, the Vol Star logo, even the power tee, the rifleman tells more about who we are than the power tee does. And so I would not have a problem with the rifleman getting more prominence in branding and things like that. However, I do think that the power tee being kind of the most traditional logo, and also like just the practicality of like, obviously football is king, and on the side of a football helmet, a power tee just looks better than like a rifleman would. I think the rifleman would get busy, especially as the face mask attaches to the helmet, and like what's going to happen to the rifle. Like, is it going to get behind some of the face mask stuff? Is it going to have screws on it? Like the power tee just fits really nicely on the side of a helmet.
Yeah.
And so I think for football specifically, sticking with the power tee on the helmet is what I would want if I was making the decisions. I wouldn't want to see a rifleman on the side of a football helmet. Not that it would look bad, not that I wouldn't enjoy it, but in terms of just keeping tradition, I do like the power tee. Now, in the same sense, I would love to see the rifleman like on a baseball hat that the baseball team wears, or even like on the front of a basketball jersey. If it was just the rifleman on that with like whatever script above or below it, I would be a fan of that as well. But for football, I think sticking with the power tee on the side of the helmet is where I would fall in that discussion. But in terms of like selling hats, selling shirts, like I would love to see the university lean into some of those, if you want to call them alternate logos, and have more like, Tennessee bookstore branded materials that are the rifleman, that are the interlocking UT, that are the Vol Star, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One of my favorite logos in recent years is a lesser known one. I know you will know about it. But Tennessee has a hockey team, and they have really dope hockey jerseys. And I'm not like a huge hockey fan, but it's the Tennessee Rifleman, and instead of a rifle, he's holding a hockey stick. And I just think that is so cool.
Hockey
I think that's hockey top. I think that's a great logo. So I'd love to see more of that kind of creativity.
Yeah.
Like the tradition's still there, but like for that particular sport, you're using it in a way that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I think Tony Vitello has a hat that he would wear that is the rifleman holding a baseball bat. I think I've seen him wear that hat before. So it's the same premise as the hockey team, but it's a baseball bat instead of the rifle.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Awesome.
And then in terms of, like you said, the smoky thing, Tony Vitello also wore a hat. And I think the golf team kind of did this first, but the golf team had the traditional there's like this old vintage logo. I don't know when it came into play, but it's kind of Smokey, like walking like bipedal, like he's walking on his
Yes.
back legs, and
Yeah.
he's kind of like in stride.
Yes.
And the golf team had him holding a golf club like over his shoulder, like he was like resting it on his shoulder, like you would a bat or a stick or whatever. Um, and and then Tony Vitello also had one like that done for the baseball team, so he's holding a bat over his shoulder. I think that logo's cool. I'm down for any of that stuff on like polos, t-shirts, hats, whatever. But yeah, in terms of the football helmet, like give me the power tee.
Power tees, baby. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Totally
One
agree.
thing I was interested, I'm sure you know about this, but I thought you would bring it up, and I was surprised you didn't. Do you remember the famous like Black Cross Tennessee logo? Are you familiar with that?
The Black Cross Tennessee logo. No.
Yeah. So in the 1960s, and I had to fact check myself here on when it was, but it started in 1965. Three coaches died in a car accident in October of 1965, so in the middle of football season.
Okay.
And so for the rest of that season, Tennessee added a black cross on top of the orange power tee. So it was the orange power tee, and then inside of the tee, they kind of had a black cross. And so they wore that logo for the rest of the 65 season, and they even wore it in 66 and 67 to
Really?
honor those coaches who died. And so obviously, like that's a super specific occasion and reason why you would change the
Sure.
logo and do it. But I do
Sure.
think that's a cool part of Tennessee history, of just like the fact that we, had this cross on our helmet with the power tee to honor those coaches who died in the 60s. So
Yeah,
I
there
think
it
that's
is.
pretty good.
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, I totally missed that in my research, but that's that's a cool that's a deep cut. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the only reason it sticks out to me is because I've seen like some documentaries and stuff talking about the old Tennessee teams, and in one of them they talked about that, and they were showing like footage of the team playing with that logo, and it actually looks pretty sweet. So I would not be opposed for Tennessee donning the black cross on top of the power tee here and there for some. I mean, if you're already going to be wearing black jerseys one game a year, if you're already going to be wearing smoky gray jerseys once a year, why not throw the black cross on there
Sure.
and just honor those coaches even still. But
Well,
yeah,
you can maybe even broaden it, just like some kind, almost like a Memorial Day, but for VFLs.
yeah, or like
get-
Christian nationalism.
Exactly. Even better. Even better. Yeah.
Exactly.
The university will do that. Yeah.
Uh,
Another thing, obviously, it's been used in various logos, but as an accent is, of course, checkerboard. Checkerboard's been used a lot as various accents. When they did the 2015 rebrand of the Power Tee, and they changed it just a little bit, they added, you've probably seen this, of course, but for a long time it was just a full orange stripe on the helmet.
right.
But in 2015, with the rebrand, on the back of the helmet, kind of like the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches, instead of a solid stripe, the stripe turns into checkerboard at the very bottom. And I loved that in 2015 when they kind of when they redid that. The Power Tee's gone through various changes. It's most often been just an orange block. Same with the numbers and the letters. But in the 90s, Tennessee had their numbers and letters were orange with a thin black trim.
Yeah.
I want that so bad because I just think that makes it pop.
Some whites, man. The Iceman whites.
Oh, the Iceman whites. Yeah, it just makes them pop. I like that. Those were the best, like cleanest Tennessee jerseys to me. So
yeah, I mean, when I think of Casey Clausen beating Florida, all I see is that white jersey with the black outline and orange number. I mean, that is like my childhood right there. That was the first Tennessee jersey I ever had. Was that white jersey with the orange number and the black outline. I mean, number 7, man. That was my childhood.
That's a good one. Do you still fit in that?
No, I do not.
Yeah.
I do not. I don't even. Gosh, I hope that's somewhere at my parents' house because that would be awesome to give to my sons and let them wear. But yeah, I don't.
Shout out mom and dad. Shout out mom and dad. Go looking.
It's got the Adidas like on the shoulder and everything. So one question I had, you mentioned in 2015 they like kind of narrowed the Tennessee, the Power Tee a little bit. Was that the university or was that like influence of Nike? Because 2015 is when we transitioned to Nike, right?
Yes. So I assume that that was part of that transition.
Okay.
The university would have to sign off on that, but I think that is something that Nike proposed is refining it, making it narrower. They don't only, I don't think it's only the power T. I think it's pretty much all the letter block and the numbering as well.
Right.
You just get you got the rebrand for that, and they put the angles on the numbers and things like that
Yeah.
instead of having them be block.
Yeah.
That was all part of the 2015. That's when the checkerboard on the back of the helmets came.
Okay.
Those were all, I think, Nike proposed tweaks that the university signed off on.
Yeah. So we hate them. Is that what you're saying? We hate all
Uh,
those tweaks now.
I hate most of them. The narrowing of the power T, I looked at them. It's not incredibly discernible to me, but I do not like the angled numbers. I've never really liked that. I like the block. I like block numbers. I think that's just because I'm a boomer. And then I
Yeah.
also, again, because I like the block numbers with the black trim, but I do love the checkerboard stripe. So
Yeah. Sure.
I think that's
I
really cool.
I always took like where it's most prominent to me is on the baseball jerseys, especially the smoky grays that they wore in years past, where it has just Tennessee in font, like kind of I would call it block font, but it does have the angled like letters that you're saying.
Yeah, those
Um,
corners are like 45-degree cuts. Yeah.
I always thought that they did that because obviously the state of Tennessee is a rhombus, so it has like the angled on the edges. I always assumed they did that to kind of reflect the state itself. Is that the impression you got, or no?
Uh, you if that's true, I've just totally missed that, but that could absolutely be right. I would make me like it a little bit more.
Yeah. See, so so to be clear, I hated the smoky gray jerseys in baseball. I hate them.
I have period.
I really don't even like them in football.
I don't either.
I think objectively they look cool. Like I get it, but like I don't like wearing them on the field. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And but the only thing I did like in baseball, again, I would never want this in football, but in baseball, I didn't mind the Nike font with the angled letters because, again, I assumed it was to lean into the rhombus shape of Tennessee. Maybe that was just something I assumed,
Yeah.
and maybe they accidentally fell into that. But
My favorite Tennessee jerseys will forever be the creams
yeah,
with the
Vol
Vols in
script.
cursive. Yeah,
Yeah,
the Vol
yeah,
script on.
yeah, yeah.
I
No,
just
those are sweet for baseball.
those are
Um, so yeah, I mean, going back to
pitiful record in those kits, but
yeah.
yeah.
Would you want to see like a rifleman on the side of a helmet?
I don't think I would want to see a rifleman on the side of the helmet. I've thought about this a little bit. I think I would like, um, of course, like on a football field or a court, you usually have things that like
Mm-hmm.
the 20. I think like riflemen, or maybe like a smoky logo or something from year to year on like the 25s or at like the different places on the court, kind of offset towards the corners. I think would be kind of cool. Another one that has never really been so going back to my question about like how would I react if there was a totally new
Oh,
logo
yeah, that's a good
that
question.
we'd
I want to
never
answer that.
seen?
Yeah.
I've tried to think of what that could be. The only thing that I've really been able to come up with, and this is probably not fair because we have used this a little bit, is just the idea of mountains because of Rocky Top.
Right.
So obviously the black helmets kind of have the mountains on them, so we've used them there. Um, and then with Pat Summit calling the court the Summit, like
Right.
there's some things there. But I've tried to wonder like, what if the university released a new logo that had to do something, obviously a connection to Rocky Top, but used like a mountain peak as like a logo in some way. And I think there could be some cool stuff there. And I don't think I would, as a secondary logo, I don't think I would like freak out over that. Um, so
Yeah.
I think there could be some cool designs there that they've probably never tapped into that would still be in keeping with the tradition of the school. I'm thinking about also like the when they had the hurricanes, the hurricanes plural, the hurricanes like the Krogers and the Walmarts. When the hurricane came through in East Tennessee and of course Western North Carolina too, but with like the relief effort and everything, they had the stickers that they put on the helmets for a while said "Mountain Strong" and they had
Right.
mountains on them.
Yeah.
Maybe just some more of that in some way. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I think that could be something that would be cool. And I'm trying to think, just like again, how would I react if this logo popped up and I'd never seen it? I think I would have liked it, but I also and I think most people did. But But anytime you depart from just what's been done for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, you're going to get people that are like, what the heck are we doing? And so
Exactly.
I'm trying to think
Yeah.
of like what that thing could be. And like Rocky Top's the one thing that I've thought of. So,
Well, one thing I thought of too, now that you're talking about it, one thing that could crop up, so this is just as like a fan, like that's just observing things. West Virginia has this helmet. You probably know it, being a closet West Virginia fan. West Virginia has this
casual admirer.
that is it's. I think they usually wear it on their navy blue helmet, but it's a navy blue helmet, and it has the yellow like state outline of
Mm-hmm.
the state of West Virginia.
Yeah.
And I think it has like WVU in the middle of it, or WV or whatever. But I could see Tennessee doing like the state outline, maybe it's like set behind the power T, or like maybe even the power T smaller and it's like around the power T or something like that. They could lean into like the state shape, just because, I mean, every state, I shouldn't say that. A lot of states have like a unique outline. Like when you see just the outline,
Sure.
what state it is.
Sure.
The exceptions would be like, for people not from the South, like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, they're all pretty similar in how they look, especially Mississippi and Alabama. They look like mirror images
the
of
coastal
each other.
states and the middle southern states. Yeah. Well, even like Louisiana. Louisiana's unique. Tennessee, Kentucky's
Texas,
pretty unique.
obviously, Florida.
Both Carolinas, Florida. Yeah,
Yep.
they all have
Yep.
pretty unique. Virginia, they're not in the SEC,
Right.
but
Right. And there's a precedent for like the state outline thing, like the Panthers, the Carolina Panthers, who, I have been a fan of in the NFL when I've cared. They have an alternate logo helmet where it's like both North and South Carolina, because they're the team of the Carolinas, not just North Carolina. And so they have kind of both states stacked on top of each other. And it, represents just,
that's cool.
Yeah. So I could see them doing something like that. So again, going back to like, how would I react to it? I just, if you're going to change something, especially when it comes to like something as iconic as the side of a football helmet, and obviously like the reason the side of a football helmet is so meaningful and impactful is because in football, unlike any other sport other than like, random stuff like lacrosse or whatever, but in football, you don't see the players' faces. You don't see, like, the helmet is who they are when they're on the field.
Right.
And that's like all you see, And so, I try to think of like, what would an Alabama fan do if they put the Alabama A on the side of their helmet instead of the number? And I think they'd probably lose their mind.
Probably.
And obviously I hate Alabama, but like, I do think there's something reverent. I hate to, like, I don't want to put too much weight on it, but there is something like super meaningful about what's on the side of your helmet, and something like changing
there's something sacred about it when it's been around that long. Yeah,
exactly. And so changing it without a great reason and without leaning into more of who you are is a super slippery slope to go down. So I'm hesitant to do anything when it comes to the side of a football helmet.
Totally agree.
But again, if the logo change was leaning more into who we are as a people, being from the state of Tennessee, I'm going to be hard pressed to dislike it. I probably will buy the merchandise that has it on it.
Sure.
But that also doesn't mean that I necessarily want it on the field representing us on national television.
So has there ever been a secondary logo that you thought, I just hate that and wish that would go away?
Yes, there is. I'm glad you asked. So you brought up Smokey being kind of something that came into prominence in the 90s. Is that what you said? Was it the 90s or 2000s? Yeah. So I don't know if this was the first Smokey that they did, but the Smokey that I remember from my childhood was like the Smokey that's kind of at an angle like this, and he's kind of like got a grimace on his face, and I hate that logo. Like, I despise that. It looks very cartoony. It looks like mean for, like, I don't know. It felt like you were trying to be Georgia, right? It just felt like we're trying to do this like mean dog thing. And like, obviously, like, blue tick coonhounds have a ferocity to them, but their ferocity is aimed at like serving their master in terms of, hunting an animal, right? It's not like blue tick coonhounds are not animals that are going to be aggressive towards their owner or towards those people.
And you think of a bulldog, you think of something that's more unhinged and wild. And
Right.
a blue tick is like, this is a domesticated animal who's
Exactly.
he's on a hunt. Yeah.
Right. A blue tick coonhound is the more functional version of like a golden retriever.
Yeah.
Truly. Like a blue tick coonhound I see as like man's best friend, stereotypical, but like actually has a purpose that it's serving. Whereas like a golden retriever is just like a big oversized lapdog. And so like I really love like the Smoky logo that has I feel like this I have no factual basis to this at all. I feel like has come on more into the scene since maybe since the Nike stuff where it's just like the full body of Smokey and it's the side profile and he's kind of, just kind of standing on all fours, looking like an actual dog and not like a mascot.
Right.
And that logo I actually really like a lot and I like on stuff. Again, wouldn't want it on like teams branding like for their jerseys and stuff, but that's a version of the Smoky logo I do like. I think it represents kind of like what the dog is more truly versus like that, like I said, that cartoony like version of Smokey I cannot stand. So
That's a good one. My hot take, and I think this is actually a logo that's pretty popular, secondary logo on things that I haven't mentioned yet, is the TriStar logo.
oh yeah.
So the orange TriStar logo is something that I know Volunteer Traditions particularly does. I think
Yes.
that there are other things as well. I don't like the TriStar, like the orange TriStar logo.
You don't like it when it's orange or you don't like it at all?
I don't like it when it's orange.
Yeah, just because it's blue, like it's supposed to be blue.
Yeah, like it's the obviously like the political idea of like the three grand divisions of the state, east,
Right.
middle, and west. And I do think the University of Tennessee, of course, like the idea of like we own the state is a good thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I I just the TriStar particularly represents like the grand divisions that exist in Tennessee, but that are unified, obviously, within the
Right.
state in some way politically. But that just doesn't it just doesn't bring up connotations of like the University of Tennessee to me because all of the other traditions are like particularly Appalachian things. So like Davy is a frontiersman. That's like,
Yep.
and the coon dog is the blue tick hound is like a distinctly Appalachian hunting style. Rocky Top is like the mountains in the east,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think that is. I just rather see a Power T or Smoky or Rifleman or any of those other things other than the Orange TriStar, and I just would be happy to see it go away.
Yeah, that's a hot take for sure. I like the logo. I like the TriStar, but that's more just because it represents the state of Tennessee to me, which obviously I love.
Sure.
But I do think that you're making a valid argument because if you think about like volunteer traditions, not the brand, but like the university's traditions, the fan base's traditions,
Yep.
and you think about like what Rocky Top the song actually means, what Davy Crockett stood for, and obviously his animal being the blue tick coonhound. Like those, I think he had a pet blue tick, right? Is that?
I think so.
Yeah. So when you think about like so much of Tennessee's history is like anti-government, especially like federal government.
Yeah.
Having the TriStar logo kind of is in opposition to the anti-government thing because obviously the TriStar being a government represented kind of logo. So I do think that's an interesting argument, and I think it's valid to say that it's antithetical to the culture to the other precedented culture that university has.
Yeah, that the other symbols represent and
Right.
all the songs and yeah. So
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
it's like you're necessarily bringing in kind of middle and west Tennessee, and if you've lived in Tennessee your whole life like we have, you know that like once you get past, there's a distinct culture of Appalachia that starts to fade out pretty quickly once you get to Nashville, and it's totally gone when you get to the other side of it. Right.
absolutely.
Like it's just a totally different place once you get out into the plains and the Delta and
Mm-hmm.
like Memphis and Jackson
Yeah,
um, and so I don't care for the university to be honoring like the grand divisions of Middle and West Tennessee particularly
mm-hmm.
with a logo. So
Yeah. Maybe what if they switched to the Unistar logo? What if it was just one star representing East Tennessee only?
Yeah, just take the other two stars off. An orange circle with one star kind of off to the side. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. Let's do that.
Exactly.
Let's do
So
that.
you didn't say this. You might not know. This is just something
I
that
mean,
came
that's
up
kind
that
of
I
like
was.
what the Vols symbol is on your shirt, right? It's like the
So
one star.
what's the significance of one star in the middle of the O? Is there
I
significance on that?
I could not find one. I could not find
Okay.
one. Yeah,
Okay.
there may be one. I may be able to do some more research and come back in a later episode. But I
Yeah.
tried to find out the significance of that, but I don't know. The star and the O, don't get it.
We're gonna just assume it's because East Tennessee is like what they're leaning into, and they're just saying screw Nashville and screw Memphis. That's what we're gonna assume.
Exactly.
So you take
Exactly.
all your best athletes, and everyone else can go kick rocks and cheer
That's
for
right.
Memphis. All right, man. Well, that was all really good. Was there any other questions or anything that you wanted to ask about the logos that we could talk about, or are you good on that?
No, I think we're good. We obviously we can revisit these things if we come back to them, but I thought it was a good place to start. The most identifiable thing when you think of Tennessee football, especially, but also just the university, is that power T. So
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Do you have a? Can you give us a preview of what you're thinking for next week?
next week, I'm thinking that one of the next most identifiable things about who we are, as far as I think football particularly, is thinking about Neyland Stadium. So we're gonna talk a little bit about General Robert Neyland and why that stadium is named after him. Of course, a lot of
Beautiful.
Tennessee fans know who he is, but I just think it's too important to pass up. So we're going to talk about General Neyland next week.
Love it. Love it. Thanks for previewing that. All right, Nick, tell them where they can find us.
Yeah, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on X at volatile_1998. And we'll be looking for you to join us while we go through the dog days of summer. And there'll be lots of football talk coming up when we start getting towards the end of the summer into camp. But we got some fun episodes lined up. Mac mentioned those a little bit later on coming up this summer. Just kind of random Tennessee related topics, and then we'll keep doing Rocky Top Roots, and hopefully that'll keep our spirits pumped up a little bit before we face the gauntlet that is this next football schedule. So I can't wait to go through that.
That's right. That's right. Just remember, listener, that our ancestors, like Davy Crockett, didn't die at the Alamo, and those 30,000 volunteers that Sam Houston got sent to them didn't die fighting wars for you to forget that is terminal.